Hello, everybody. Bree Sedano here, coming to you live to talk about 3 mental barriers to wealth, to money, honestly, to like all sorts of forms of success. The mental barriers that we're going to talk about today could really be on any topic. I just happen to talk about money, wealth, and success. So, if this is your first time getting to know me, my name is Bree Sedano. I am the owner and founder of Cash Confident. And my kind of like special sauce on money is really looking at the deeper layers of what's going on inside of our minds and inside of our emotions, inside of our like energy. So that way we can look and see what's actually going on with the money. Although I do teach some very practical strategies also. So if this is your first time ever getting to know me or meeting me live, please say hello. So that way I just know that you're here and I can say hi and welcome you to the community. And if you're somebody who watches all the time, also please say hello. And as we get into this conversation, if you really enjoy it, if you feel like there's a lot of value, if you're, if there's something that like blows your mind a little bit, please feel free to share my work. Feel free to send it to a friend in their inbox or tag a friend or invite a friend to the Facebook group if you're inside of that Cash Confident with Bree Sedano Facebook group. Please feel free to do all those things. I'm not currently running ads, and so that is how we spread the message. All right. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into all of the things. All right. So when it comes to making more money, having more wealth, having more success, there's 3 different types of mental barriers that are really worth looking at. And honestly, if you were going to really look big picture, they're kind of all similar, but they're a little bit different. And I do think that there's some nuanced ways that they show up. So this is actually a pretty advanced talk about like the way that our brain works. And so you may need to listen to this more than once, right? Just we're going to get right into it and I'm going to go. So this is really like more of an advanced class anyways, where I'm going with this. All right. I think I have lipstick on my teeth and it is embarrassing and bothering me. All right. Well, thank you for witnessing that. All right. So the first mental barrier that we will have to success or I don't know, to whatever kind of success is going to be a limiting belief. Now, I want you to understand that all beliefs provide both structure for you to operate in and limitation. Like every single belief does both. And not all beliefs are limiting beliefs. Obviously, sometimes we have beliefs that are just fine to have, then there's no problem. I also want you to understand that you may have added a belief, like may have taken on a belief on purpose, affirmed to yourself over and over again to get a certain belief inside your mind. And you may also outgrow that belief in time. I see that a ton with people who had to take on a lot of belief structures to get the courage and get the momentum to start a business. And then they get to be like 6 figures, multiple 6 figures. And then those same belief structures that they intentionally installed become too small. They become limiting beliefs. All right. So a limiting belief is a belief that is honestly just a truth that you have, a truth that you know that is too small for your current level of whatever it is you're doing. So let's say you're an employee. That may be things like, all right, well, I'm already at the top of my pay grade. There's no more money available to me. Right? So if you want more money and you believe that there's not any more available to you, that's going to be a limitation. I'm not saying that it's not true, but what it does is it prevents you from seeing possibilities beyond the belief. Right? So sometimes we may have a limiting belief that is also true, but it's not the entirety of truth. And I'm going to explain this for a second. Let's just say, like, I have a glass. Like, I have all my cups in a glass thing. Now, let's just say this glass jar was the entirety of truth, all of the truth that there was available. If I smashed that glass into 1,000 pieces and I picked up a fragment of truth, a fragment of this jar, it would be true, but not the entirety of the truth. So let me give you an example. So I had a client once who was a teacher. She was at the top of her pay grade and she really wanted to make more money and she really wanted to have an easier job. And she was at the top of her pay grade. And so when she realized that that limiting belief had been limiting her perception on what she even saw as available, she decided she would apply to other districts, right? And so this doesn't sound like rocket science, but it is because she had to change her whole perception around what she saw was possible. And so then she ends up getting another job. She's actually the highest paid teacher I've ever worked with who works inside of a classroom. I've seen administrators make much more money, but she nearly doubled her salary by switching district, even though she for the longest time stayed at her current district because she believed that she was already, at the top of what what was potential for her. So that's the thing about limiting beliefs is a limiting belief will get in the way. Sometimes a limiting belief will block a desire because you don't see something as possible, right? So it's like, oh, I want to go to Greece, but I don't believe I could have the money. I don't see how it could happen, right? So sometimes a limiting beliefs will even block you from even having a desire, right? So that's one way that limiting beliefs really impact you. Sometimes limiting beliefs will get in the way early once you have something that you want and will they'll just add obstacles. So sometimes you'll see a lot of obstacles in your way between here and the thing that you want. And that may not always be the only or the best way to look at something. So a limiting belief is just when like you have a belief structure that is in the way. Like you would have to overcome said belief structure to really be able to get to the desire. And every single person is going to have limiting beliefs. And you're going to take on new limiting beliefs, and the beliefs that you also install may be limiting in time. I'm going to give you another story. So I have a client right now who she does about $300,000 a year in her business, and she's working on scaling towards seven figures and multiple seven figures. That's what she really wants to be. That's what she's honestly really capable of. And so one of the belief structures that she currently holds is that she can count on herself, that no matter what, she can get it done, that no matter what she knows, she can problem solve, she can take care of it. So this belief is something that she had to put in to be able to get to that multiple six-figure mark, right? Like she had to know that she could count on herself. That belief helped her to have a sense of confidence. It had helped her to grow outside of her comfort zone because she knew that she could always figure it out, right? But now that belief has become too small. So now that same belief that she put in place on purpose when she started her business now is in her way because it means that she doesn't fully trust her staff. She doesn't fully empower her staff. That she's taking responsibility for things that are really her team's responsibility. She sometimes undermines them and doesn't let them finish their jobs, and so that same belief structure of I can always count on me, we have to like grow and expand that to be like, no matter what, I can count on myself and my team. No matter what, my team will figure this out. No matter what, I'm the leader that can help my team achieve these goals. And that's a really, really big mindset shift to make, but it's like that's just another interesting iteration of the way that a limiting belief can show up. Sometimes because sometimes it's the belief structures that we put in on purpose to get us this far won't get us all the way. And we constantly need to be like reevaluating those things, right? So that's one way that you can have some barriers to wealth. So like things like money is hard to come by is a common limiting belief, or you have to work, you have to spend all your time to make money, or you have to work hard to make money, or those are pretty common limiting beliefs about money, or that the more I make, the more that I spend. That's a common limiting belief, which will create a limited situation. What else? What other common limiting beliefs are there? Like sometimes we just believe that money is available, but like not for me, right? So like I know that people are rich, but like not me. Like I'm not able to be rich, right? So that's another way that that can be like eliminate, because then it also I put it on myself, right? So those are limiting beliefs. So you're going to note it. You have to kind of listen for them, and then you have to take on the assumption that if this was true, how would this impact, my life, my behavior, my thoughts, my actions? Because a lot of times limiting beliefs are also true, right? Like they're not, you didn't make them up. It's not that they were not true when you experienced it, but it's that it's just not the only truth that's available. So a lot of times limiting beliefs were installed when we were kids. And if we keep those same belief structures, we will recreate our parents' money junk. And the thing is, it's like you could really choose different beliefs. You could really decide, like, yes, this is the way that I grew up. This is what was happening when I was growing up. This is what I know, but I don't want that anymore. So I'd have to look at what belief structures kind of keep me stuck here. Super juicy. All right. So the next thing, you guys, I still have lipstick on my teeth, and I hope that's better because I'm thoroughly embarrassed. Okay. The next like the next mental barrier to having more wealth and more success is really around judgments. Now, a judgment is a belief that also has a story attached to it. So it would be something like, if I had too much money, it would mean I'm a greedy capitalist pig. If my life was too easy, it would mean that my friends and family wouldn't like me anymore. I wouldn't be relatable. If I had you know, if I wanted to be the center of attention, it would mean that that was dangerous because because there was a thing that happened in the past that made me believe that too much attention is dangerous, right? So judgments are like it's a limiting belief that is kind of cemented into an emotional story, and it's generally going to be about like good and bad, right and wrong, safe or dangerous, better or worse. And then sometimes it would just mean, like, sometimes we have more flavors and colors to the judgments, things like I would be greedy, and then you'd have to be like, and that would be wrong, right? So if I had too much money, that means I would be greedy, and that would be wrong, right? And so you can kind of start to like look at the judgments that you have. Now, the thing about judgments is that we always want to be on the right side of our own judgments. So let's just say I have a belief that you have to work hard to make money. And if you don't work hard to make money, that something's wrong, you're bad, you're greedy, you're evil, right? So if I have the opportunity to make money in easy ways, right, like leveraging my time, leveraging my programs, finding ways to get more people to work for me, things like that, then I may end up feeling wrong, bad, and greedy. And I would have to be on the wrong side of my own judgment, which is going to cause either resistance to taking the actions, like, oh, I get real resistant when it's time to hire, or I just won't get my course together. There'll be like resistance to taking the action. Or if you do take the action, you may self-sabotage to get out of it. So you'd have to go back because your brain does not want you to be on the wrong side of your own judgments. Like these judgments that we make, we construct our identity out of them. And so your brain really, really wants you to be on the right side of your own judgments and congruent with who you think you are and what you believe to be good, right? Like that's going to be really, really important to you. And so if you were taking action, that would mean that you'd be greedy and wrong, or that your work would be not as valid because it came easy. Those are places where those judgments will either get in the, like, you're either not take the actions required to be on the wrong side of those judgments. You'll feel a lot of guilt or a lot of resistance or a lot of just like stickiness. Like people will say things like, it just doesn't feel right. Like I just feel bad about this. Right. And so that's generally going to be an indication that there's a judgment happening and you are trying your very best to, like, you may have a desire that's on the wrong side of your judgment, but you want to be on the right side of your judgment. And that's where that like internal stickiness kind of comes in. Um, so your judgments are generally gonna show up like in actions or lack thereof, your resistance, or you may be able to cross the line of your own judgments, and then you'll either justify it because you believe that you're wrong, or you'll self-sabotage if it's something big. So justification is an interesting thing, and I find a lot of women have a lot of justifications around money. And when I hear clients justifying something, generally that's going to signal to me that they're on the wrong side of their own judgment. It's just not a huge judgment. It's not like a massive judgment. So let's just say if you believe that spending money on yourself is wrong, and this is a very common belief, you will justify that. You'll be like, all right, well, I really needed this. Or I haven't bought one of these in a couple of years and I really, really needed it. Or it was really, really time. Right. And so, like, you feel you're on the wrong side of your own judgment, but it's not maybe the biggest of judgments. It's not like a catastrophic judgment, like, murder or like, whatever else. The judgments come in different sizes. You'll use a lot of your energy over explaining and justifying. And that's a way that women actually, what I notice is they really squander their energy, but also in doing that, they erode their credibility, because people can hear, like on a subconscious level, they can hear that you're doing something you think is wrong. And that creates an incongruence. And it's something that, like, it will ever so slightly irk people, but they won't necessarily cognitively be aware of it. Right. And so if you're listening to somebody really justifying something, you're like, what's the problem here? Just buy your purse or don't buy your purse, lady. Nobody wants to hear your weird story about all of the reasons you need a high-end purse, right? It's just weird. Like, we'll hear it and we're like, well, that doesn't make sense exactly, but it does make sense. But that's why people do this. So that justification piece will happen when you're on the wrong side of your own judgment. So that's a really good way for you to know, wow, I'm really feeling I need to over explain myself here. Do I have a judgment that's maybe not helpful anymore? Right. And so our, like, society in general, like, we have a lot of judgments about money, that like from religious, I mean, there's a shit ton about religion, like poverty being pious, greediness, being wrong, having too much money being wrong, having too much money making you not spiritual or not a good person. So some of those things are even like to the core of who you believe you are as like a spiritual being. And then sometimes it's just like regular stuff, like, oh, I don't want to be greedy. I don't want to be seen as greedy. I don't want to be seen as lazy. I don't want to be seen as unproductive. I don't want people to think that my life is super easy, because we're like family creatures. We live in community. So those judgments that we have help us to like stay within the social constructs of a community. But sometimes they don't even do that. Sometimes they're just weird, right? So judgments are going to generally have like that emotional bit. All right. So we talked about, what did we talk? We talked about justification. We talked about resistance. So you're going to have justification if you're on the wrong side. And also, if you're on the wrong side of your judgment, if it's a bigger judgment, you're probably going to self-sabotage to get back to where you came from. So if you believe, let's say, that having too much money makes you greedy and you get too much money, you're probably going to spend it, give it away, get rid of it, lose it, like, you'll get rid of the money because you don't actually want it. You'd prefer to be back on the right side of your own judgment. So that's another place that, like, when people self-sabotage, what they're really trying to do is be congruent with themselves. So these belief structures that we have are really, really worth looking for, because we're we're powerful in our subconscious state. You know what I mean? So it's not like anybody self-sabotages. They're like, well, today's Tuesday. It's 10:19 a.m. I've been working for months on this thing. I think I will ruin it today after lunch. Nobody says these things. Nobody thinks about these things. So self-sabotage generally happens from the subconscious state. So when your subconscious is like, we are on the wrong side of our own judgment here, that feels real bad. It feels real dangerous. We don't know who we are when we're on the wrong side of our judgment. We're incongruent with who we think we are. Let's just get rid of this money. Let's just get rid of it. Let's find an emergency. Let's, give it to the kids. Let's look at your pets look sick. They need to go to the vet. It is an emergency. Those are the kinds of things that will happen when you're on the wrong side of your own judgment. And so the judgments that we have around work, spending, earning, savings, debt, money in general, rich people, poor people, what it takes to be successful, those kind of judgments really, really impact how much money you can make, how much money you can hold, how big your business can grow, and such things. And so when I'm working with clients in Limitless Wealth, I'm working with clients on their businesses. Judgments are a huge part of what we're looking at, because those are when you start to make a couple $100,000, most of the time that's gonna, for most people that I've worked with anyways, it's probably not true across the board, but a lot of people kind of grew up middle class or lower middle class or whatever. And when they start to be successful enough that they be wealthy, all of these judgments kind of pop up, because before you weren't bumping into them. They weren't really a problem. But as you grow and expand, those judgments then become problematic. And a lot of times they're going to be rooted in the fear that I'm not going to be allowed to be with my people anymore, right? That my family is going to reject me because I'm going to be different, that people are going to treat me different, that I can't trust my friends anymore if I make too much money. These are all going to be the ways that judgments show up. All right, I think I covered judgments. All right, so again, let me know if you're with me. Give me a heart or a like if you're with it. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and put them. You can go ahead and put them in the chat, and I will do my best to answer them as the week goes on. All right. And so then the third mental barrier to wealth is, it's like a judgment, but it's two. So sometimes we will have an internal conflict. I mean, that's the way that I put it when I'm looking at clients. So an internal conflict is when you would have to do a certain amount of things to meet judgments on one subject, but you'd have to meet a different and conflicting set of behaviors or actions or belief structures to be good at something else, right? And that will create a lot of internal conflict. Now, I do want to say that internal conflict is part of the experience of making a decision, especially a big decision like leaving a job, starting a business, leaving a spouse, moving houses, right? Those things are all really big things. And internal conflict is going to be part of the decision-making process. That's going to be part of it. So I don't want you to necessarily get to the place where you believe that all internal conflict is wrong or bad. Part of it is just going to be natural. Where I'm talking about it in terms of a blockage around money, it's sometimes I'll have clients that are wired for pain. So that may be, I'm going to give the example. This is my example. But when I was, a few years ago, before I'd done all this work, I was a stockbroker and I also had small kids. And I had this belief that if I was going to be a good mom, I needed to be home and I needed to cook my kids dinner. And I simultaneously had a belief that if I was going to be good and at my job and be able to make the kind of money I wanted to make, I needed to take evening appointments. Those two things cannot simultaneously happen. I'm either at home cooking dinner or I'm at the office seeing clients late at night. You cannot do both at the same time. And so it would create such a sense of internal conflict. And honestly, it was painful. It was a painful experience because I perpetually felt inadequate. I was inadequate in my motherhood, I was inadequate in my work, right? And feeling perpetually inadequate sucks, hurts your feelings. You don't feel great, right? And so because I had those two conflicting belief structures, there was a lot of pain. Literally, I cried on my kitchen floor probably a couple times a week for a year because at that point in time, I didn't have the skills to rectify that. And so I was just always wrong. I just always felt wrong and inadequate, right? So that's one way that an internal conflict can happen. But also it can just be like around meeting certain operating instructions, right? Like so if it was so let's just say if I have beliefs about what it takes to be successful and they conflict with each other, like right, like if I need to wake up early and have a stellar morning routine and also I have a belief structure or a desire that I wake up on my own natural rhythm, right? And I don't have an alarm and I don't necessarily have that structure. I'm going to feel bad and I'm going to oscillate between the two. So internal conflicts can cause it just honestly it's a lot of exhaustion. Like when clients come to talk to me and they're generally exhausted, they're so tired in their business or they're so tired at work or they don't have the energy for things. Generally, I'm going to look for internal conflicts because that creates a lot of it. To be able to live in a state of internal conflict, you always have to be using your energy to suppress one of those belief structures, or, because your energy is just going to be all over the place. It's going to be trying to work itself around these different rules that you have. So different kinds of internal conflicts. One, we just talked about wired for pain, right? So if you have conflicting belief structures around what it takes, especially in like key primary roles of your life, things like, your motherhood and your business, or your motherhood and your marriage, or your motherhood, marriage, and your work, like those are going to be really big places where you can be wired for pain, right? So like if you can't win with yourself, if you can't win with yourself, you're going to be wired for pain. And those are generally like, we want to clean those up as best as possible because it hurts ourselves. Like we hurt ourselves to be in those states. Then sometimes our internal conflicts will just gum up the works around decision making, right? So it'll be like, well, I want this, but I'm not really sure I want it. Or I want this, but I think something bad will happen if I get it. Or I want this, but I don't actually want to do what it would take to get that. Right? So that will be some internal conflict because you have a desire pulling you in one direction, but you have either belief structures or judgments, or honestly, just like an emotional baggage or resistance kind of pulling you in a different direction. So that's another thing. Sometimes it's going to be like even setting the direction. I'll give you a quick example. So one time I had a client that I talked to she just started her own business. She was already successful, already making six figures in her business that was like 7 or 8 months old. And also she lost her job at the beginning of COVID. That's why she started the business. So she was taking half of her time to apply for a job she didn't want. She didn't want to get a job. She didn't want to do that. But there was like a fear driving that action. So she was spending half of her time and her effort building her business and half of her time and effort looking for a job. These are two conflicting, they could not work at the same time, right? Like, so she wanted to be full-time in her business, but she was acting on fear that it wasn't going to work. And she was trying to hedge her bets by getting a job. But what this did is it split her time and attention and made her less successful in the business because she was spending half of her time looking for a job, and it made her less successful. I mean, she was less successful in the job search because she literally didn't want a job. She didn't want that to work. Like she was doing it. It was a weird thing to witness, but she was doing it to like appease some sense of she should have a job, right? So there were some judgments there around having a job and what that means and what that looks like. And to her, having her own business was risky and scary, and she didn't have models for that. Like she grew up in a family that was like, union workers, blue collar workers. So her having her own business, she didn't really have a lot of modeling for. So she had to really, really imagine it. Right. And so that's a way that these internal conflicts come up. Sometimes our internal conflicts come up as like a subconscious loyalty. So this can be like, all right, well, I want this and I have the power to go get it. But if I do, I'm going to lose my place in the family, right? I'm going to lose my place with my friends. People are going to think I'm different. People aren't going to like me the same anymore. And honestly, That is one there's an element of truth to that when you start to be very successful. A lot of times you don't have to like get rid of friends or can't get rid of your family, but like you may need to make new friends in addition to your old friends, and you may need to change some of the nature of some of like your family relationships, because sometimes as you grow and progress, it makes people feel less than, not because you made them feel less than, but because they see your success and they see their lack of success, and then they feel some kind of way. I mean, it's a thing. It's a real thing. So that can be another sort of internal conflict, these subconscious loyalties. So it's like, I want to be a multimillionaire, but I'm afraid that if I was, I'm not going to get invited to Thanksgiving dinner type thing, right? Like, or I want to be this and that. But I know my friends won't ever be able to come on those kinds of vacations with me unless they really change their lives. You know what I mean? So that's like its own flavor of an internal conflict where we believe that the money, the success, the win, and I'm really talking like it could be relationship wins, it could be business wins, it could be just general success, it could be health and fitness wins, would separate us from our people, from, our families, our friends, or our like social community. So that's another place where internal conflict is very, very common. All right. I think that's all of my talks. All right, so uh, when you want to start to notice where your thoughts are going, and sometimes your thoughts will bump up against the belief structure, and you'll have to kind of ask yourself, like, that's an interesting thought. What belief must be there for that thought to be like existing, right? Because generally, your belief structures, your judgments, your belief structures, and the judgments or belief structures that make up an internal conflict, they're really much more in your subconscious. They're not necessarily going to be at the top of your conscious mind, right? So most of the time, I'm not going to hear a client say to me, "Well, I believe that I would be a very greedy capitalist pig if I was to make too much money." Right? Like a lot of times that thought, that belief structure is not going to make it to the conscious mind. It's not, those exact words are not going to come out of your mouth without some digging. So you may be like, this feels wrong. I feel like this would be too much. I feel a sense of worry, so sometimes there'll be a feeling, and sometimes, um, you may just be like, oh, I don't think I can get another job. So something like that's going to be like a really clear indicator. So what you're going to want to do to find these mental barriers and identify them is going to be really to pay attention to where your words go, and like if you say certain words, what kind of feelings arise in your body. Like that's going to be how you're going to find them. And one of the things that I do with clients inside Limitless Wealth is we look for these deeper belief structures, because when we clean those up, we find that clients make much, much, much more money very, very quickly. And so this is a huge part of the work that I do with either my private clients or with clients in Limitless Wealth, is we like dig in all the way to find these belief structures that are in the way. And there's an interesting thing that happens when somebody has made already six figures in their business and they're still growing and expanding, and that they've done a lot of work to get there. They've had to work on themselves. They've had to clean up their mental capacities, but then they start to bump up against their new mental structures. And so we have to really reevaluate. And the more specific you need these belief structures to be, the more nuanced we have to get with them. So like there's some common limiting beliefs about money in general. There's some common limiting beliefs about business in general, but sometimes business owners will have something very specific that is a limitation in their business. Well, let me give you an example. So like in my business, my first business coach taught me to do high-end, long-term containers, right? And so when I started, that advice was wonderful because I could get one or two clients a month. I could pay all my bills. I could pay my team, and I could be good, right? And as I've grown and expanded, I don't really have the time or capacity to do so much one-on-one work, or even leveraged, my work. I usually generally do like a hybrid where I work with clients one-on-one some, and I work with clients in a group some, right? And so those belief structures became really problematic as I was trying to grow and I was trying to scale. And I would feel like, oh, this group program, and it would just, I would get like internally conflicted about it. And so that's an example, right? Where it's like, this belief structure that helped me to get so far then became a limitation once I'd outgrown it. And that was something that I had to like see and work on. So that's when I'm working with clients in Limitless Wealth, a lot of times there's those kind of belief structures where we got to like go the layers deeper to see what these things actually mean. And then that's when we change those belief structures, we find that paths for success just open right up, and it becomes very fast and very easy to then take the actions required to make them more money. It's not like you change your belief structures and then all of a sudden you make more money. It's like you change your belief structures and then the emotional resistance that was in the way, that drops away, and then you can take the actions, right? So like if I'm going to give you another example. So at one point I had a client who didn't want to make her sales calls. She was in real estate, and there was outbound sales calls that needed to be made. She needed to call people back. She needed to get in contact with her leads. Like she needed to do this to be successful, but she felt like selling was gross and sleazy and she didn't want to do it, and it was wrong and it was bad and it was bad, bad, bad. And so she would delay, and a lot of times she would lose her clients because another real estate agent called them back faster. And so this avoidance was costing her a lot of money, like a real lot of money. And she was paying for the leads and she was taking almost all of the actions, but it was the avoidance, because when she was selling, she had to be on the wrong side of her own judgment. And so when we found that, we looked at those judgments, we got her to feel good and safe selling. And then she was able to make those sales calls with no resistance. And then that problem really went away and her income skyrocketed. So it's not like woo-woo magic, although it's pretty woo. It's pretty like invisible. It's pretty like, in the mind, in the emotions. But it's the sort of thing where when you can take the actions, everything can really make the moves and everything can really flow quickly. So anyways, right now Limitless Wealth is my high-end mastermind. It's for women business owners who are already making at least 6 figures and are really working towards 7. So if you want to talk about that, if you want to talk about, those sort of things with me, you can book a call. The link to my calendar is in the description, and I will ask a couple questions about what you do for business. Then I can give you like a friendly little internet stock, and then I'll run you through all the details of the program. And if it's a fit, then we can talk about joining. And if it's not, then I will help you as much as I can on our very quick call. All right. I love you. I appreciate you. Thanks for hanging out with me.